Hello, ladies. Thank you for joining us. It's a treat when the person that's presenting is sitting next to me instead of on the box in the screen. So that's cool. This is my friend Julie. She's an amazing human, and I am excited to have her share with us today, and for the people who are going to enjoy the recording later. So we'll start with our breath like we usually do, because I always find that really helps us to arrive in the space together and feel a little bit more coherent and neutral in our, oh, hello. Trying something new, Sharon? Let's see if that works. Sharona Fish. Okay, can you hear
that? I love that name. What handle?
Okay.
All right. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, I got the audio to work.
All right,
So,
sweet.
hi. Hello.
Okay, so we are going to just do a breath together. So if you guys can find just a comfy spot. I know sometimes people are multitasking while they're joining us, but for those who are able to dedicate your full attention, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment and let your shoulders drop. And just notice the pathway of air moving in through the nose and into the body, and just notice where it goes. Allowing your senses to heighten and that visual and mental energy to soften. And then let's do gamma breathing today. It's a nice little framework for it. We'll take 3-second breaths. I will guide you as to whether to breathe through your nose or mouth. So the first breath is in mouth for 3 seconds, exhale mouth for 3 seconds. That's how we'll start. So mouth, mouth. Inhale mouth, exhale nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. Mouth, nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. Mouth, nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. And then just rest for a moment. Noticing any shift you've created. Just opening your eyes, coming back to the space, bringing that softer more open mind with you. So thanks everyone again for joining us. Julie, I will let her introduce herself. I have known her for as long almost as I've lived in Baja, and was lucky enough to do this psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with her. And I was really passionate about bringing the conversation to this space. And so I will pass it to Julie to tell us a little bit more about the process. Thank you, babe.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here. And to share this experience and to be here with you and your community. So couple of things that I'll say. So my name is Julianna Chapman. I'm a holistic psychotherapist. So I was very traditionally trained in mental health as a therapist, and I actually didn't try any psychedelics myself in any way, shape, or form until about 5 years ago. And so my training as a therapist, I'm a trauma therapist by training. And about 4 years ago is when I started delving into, looking at the research and the efficacy around the use of psychedelics in mental health, especially in trauma work and for treatment-resistant depression. And I just really fell in love with the process because it invites in a more holistic approach. So, when you asked me actually to do this, I was thinking about it. Oh yeah, psychos, like, what do I call it? But to be honest, like, I really do merge a lot of different philosophies in my approach. But what I will say is that at the root of psychedelic medicine is about finding the inner healer in you. And so at the root of it is how to find your own voice, finding your own intuition and your own guidance, and how to listen to your own body. And so what happens, and I particularly work with psilocybin. There's a variety of different psychedelics that people use, but that is the substance that I work with, mainly because it's an organic substance, grows wild, and there's something about the connection to the earth that really suits me. And so the journey into an altered state of consciousness, what it really does is expands our capacity to see things from different vantage points. And so while I have spent years working with people who've experienced trauma to help them try to reframe this story that they hold in their body around that traumatic event, the progress that I've seen people go through with the use of psilocybin is just so much faster. So, and I say that because all of your senses are involved in the process. So instead of it just being a conversation and really working to just change the mind through thinking and thoughts, you're actually in kind of like a very different full body experience and accessing wisdom through all your sensory fields. So touch, taste, sound, these all become really important components of healing. And I think that, I'll share a quick little story. I just actually did a integration session yesterday with a doctor, and he of course was like, I can't, was very nervous about like using psychedelics for a lot of reasons, although in Oregon it's legal now. And after he did it, he sat down. He's suffered from depression for a really long time. And he sat down and told me, and it was really interesting. He goes, did you know there is a whole world of wonder and awe and beauty that is accessible to us all the time? And it was just this like huge light bulb moment for him, which I think for some of us who have contact with that realm and we can like live in that realm, it might not be as shocking, but I think that what it did for him was expanded this very narrow framework and understanding of the world, and expanded his consciousness to make space for and invite in beauty and awe and wonder, right? And so these were things that he had lost contact with. And I like to say that the true medicine of any psychedelic is not just the experience. While the experience can truly be profound and can really shift our way of thinking about things, the true lasting medicine for change is in the integration of those concepts that we are that are exposed during that journey. So, for example, with this doctor, when I was talking with him, I was like, what are some of the things that you can do on a daily basis now that there is some neuroplasticity, meaning that the neural pathways in our brain that make connections to different things is more fluid, more plastic, it's more amiable to make changes. So while we're in that space, what are some things that you can do on a daily basis to continue to practice this awareness to the awe and the beauty and the wonder, to continue to grow that expansiveness in your daily life? So that's really an important part of this. And that's wisdom that's in him, right? And there is wisdom that's in all of us that gets shut off. We call kind of the mode is our default mode. So our default mode is kind of it's like where our programming lives, our programming from wounds, our programming from society, from our culture, from our religion, from whatever influences we've had throughout our lives. It makes up kind of this default programming, the way that we've learned to survive in the world. And what happens in a psychedelic experience is that all shifts. So we drop out of that default programming and we get to see things from a very different state of mind. And again, it's wisdom that is still you, but it's without that programming. So another way to kind of explain it is like you kind of get a lift up and out of the noise, and you get to see things from a new perspective. Would you say that sounds similar to what you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so personal too, because I live in the awe and wonder, right? But I still, for me, it was a very palpable feeling of like a stuckness, where my ability to tap into the awe and wonder, my ability to be curious and honest, all of that was coming up short. And I had this shapeless knowledge packed in me somewhere that I wanted to access. I could feel it there. I could feel that clarity present. And I was just cleaning out the basement and not finding the box I was looking for. And I felt very much like myself in a lot of ways, even though it was a very uncomfortable meeting my discomfort process. I was very much there to do that. And so that's what I got. But I remember all the words I thought, all the feelings I had, everything that she reflected back to me felt like me, felt like what I already believed, but there was just some kind of somatic knowing and settledness, like that feeling of dropping out of the head and having the knowledge be in the body and in all the senses that she was talking about. And for that box, I was able to open it up and make sense of all this other information that I had compiled, and I was looking for this missing piece. And, the puzzle felt complete. And I feel like that's just a really natural process to go through in life, where you're putting the puzzle pieces together and you're doing your best and you're using your past experiences and your ability to reprogram and deprogram and all of those things. And then there's just sometimes just the few pieces are just difficult to find and fit. And I love having a tool like this, especially having not only the tool of the medicine, because I've done the medicine by myself and didn't have the same outcome. In fact, had almost sometimes opposite outcome, where I felt like a recoil from the medicine because I also needed the process and the person. And that's a huge part of the medicine is the process, the person. And, you know, like I took it in a good set and setting. I had space, I had nature, I had, you know, like but I really needed more intentionality and maybe an experienced sitter to just have the energy of, you know, like true safety so that I could get brave enough to go past my own. I didn't have to take care of myself, you know, and I really needed to go past the ability to take care of myself to find what I was looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point too, around like because I think as psychedelics make the renaissance, a lot of people are like, well, I took it in the, you know, this day or that day, you know, or partying or for this or that. And the intention really does shift things, but also the set and the setting. And I think that the thing to just expand a little bit more on what you're describing is the safety that's required for this medicine to do its work. And so if you think about it, like, again, our default programming and our ego is the collection of all the rules that we've collected that we are supposed to do in order to be safe in the world. And when I say safe, I mean belong, feel included, feel loved, accepted, seen, right? All of these kind of unspoken rules that we have picked up on that says, oh, this is how I'm supposed to act or behave. And so if all those rules are gone, it leaves us very, very vulnerable. And so in order to feel safe in that space, it's really important to be in a setting and with a person that you feel safe to fully reveal yourself with. And so we like to say sometimes that the difference between a good trip and a bad trip is often the level of it's the safety. So a lot of bad trips that I've heard people experience, it was like they were in a group setting, they were in a party setting, they were in, you know, a setting that just was too alarming to their nervous system. And so then that lack of safety became the focus instead of the inner work. And so there is something that happens too when you sit with a guide who is familiar with that state of mind, is familiar with that expanded state of consciousness to help guide you. And so the open-ended questions that I'll ask, or I'll just say, tell me more. So like my role as a guide continues to just be curious. And in my curiosity, it allows, you know, the person to go deeper and to really ask why and to be curious themselves. And so it is like following this little trail back to your own wisdom. But it's wisdom that's found underneath all but shouldn't I be, or they said I should have to, or in order to receive love, I think I should, right? So once you get all of those rules out of the way, there really is this pure sense of knowing. And I think that the other piece of that is like the interconnectedness that you experience. And I think that is one of the components that I really enjoy about this medicine in particular, because I mean, especially right now when loneliness is a huge issue, and I think the root of a lot of mental health conditions that we're experiencing, to feel that sense of like, oh, I am connected to the world. I am connected to the trees, to the rocks, to like every living thing, right? It just creates a sense of comfort and belonging that is more rooted and deeper than just like whether so-and-so has called us or have I talked to so-and-so recently, right? There's just this like deeper sense of knowing that you're connected to the energy of the universe. And that experience, I think is very, like, it puts people at ease. So the reason that, like, I think that this is also really has a beneficial effect around depression, for example, is for that reason as well. Anything in particular that trying to think if
well, something that I thought about was the safety that you're talking about,
Mm.
I think that there is something to the amount of like how much mushrooms you would take in a party setting or even at home by yourself is a different, like, you would take enough that you would have your faculties, because otherwise unless you had a sitter, unless you had somebody who was expressly in the role of caring for you. And there is a very different outcome to the dosing as well. Like I wouldn't take so much that I felt, incapacitated. And for that reason, being on the edge actually made me much more uncomfortable than going past the edge. And it was knowing that that this was expressly for this basement digging. I'm trying to go deep. So I'm going to take enough so that I am not really responsible for myself anymore. And I expressly have this person responsible for me. It's a different paradigm than taking it recreationally, which I've taken, a lot of, like, I've taken LSD, I've done ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting. I've taken mushrooms, like, kind of recreationally and kind of like in a personal ceremonial way. I've had all different kinds of outcomes. This was most like the ayahuasca ceremony because it was most far away from my everyday state of consciousness. And that was because I took enough. When I've taken mushrooms in the past, it was like, yeah, I wanted to lay in bed. I had a body buzz. Maybe I got like kind of like uncomfortable because I was between the two worlds, but I didn't take as much as when I did with Julie. And that was what kind of pushed me into where I needed to go. Which, it is inherently uncomfortable to be unsafe and to require someone else to be in care of you as a grown-up. And so just meeting that discomfort was like part of what I knew would be the medicine, and was definitely the medicine. It's like, I don't really feel like this is a dip your toe in kind of experience. Like it's a full commitment.
Yeah. And actually to that lines, it can be more uncomfortable if you don't do enough.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you stay just kind of on that edge, and that can be actually more uncomfortable. It's like, someone joked with me before about, like, it's just about doing enough to kind of kick you over and to the other side of, like, really dissolving that ego where you can really be with yourself. And I would also say that this journey, the reason why it's called a journey is because once that medicine hits you, the place that you start is not going to be the place that you end. And I think that people will sift through a lot of different experiences and a lot of different emotions in that space. So I've seen people laugh hysterically and then cry hysterically, right? And so there's an opportunity for a lot of release that also happens when we are not, because I think one of the default modes that a lot of us that are often in is, I can't show that emotion, I need to suppress it, right? That wouldn't be acceptable, or what would people think of me, right? So we do a lot of emotional suppression that, again, in this space of outside that default mode, people laugh, they cry, and they might get angry, right? There's just a variety of emotions that are there that are present to be released.
Well, there's something about being witnessed too. It's like when you're crying alone, it feels much different than when you're crying with somebody.
Yeah.
And if you set yourself up in a circumstance where you are going for, you're looking for the stuff that you kind of shoved down, overregulated, needed to control for whatever like functional purpose, you don't want to go cry by yourself. Like that doesn't feel therapeutic. At least for me, there was much more having the connection in the community and that kind of like mycelium analogy happening, where that connection to the earth and all people in the universe, the oneness, the cosmic soup, and through this person who was witnessing me in this journey. I cried and cried and cried, and most of it didn't even feel sad, but it was just this release that would not have felt, it would have felt sad instead of just like the tea kettle whistling, like releasing the pressure. I felt like I was releasing the pressure, and I was being witnessed, and I was being held. And that really helped me process the feelings. Like it felt like they came to completion versus just being in sadness. And I think a witness is a huge aspect of that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is a component to why that really happens is that most of the wounds that we carry with us are wounds that happen in relationship. So there's wounds of abandonment or wounds of not being worthy or wounds of not being belonging or objection or whatever those things are. So a lot of the wounds we carry as adults in that default programming, they happened in relationship. And so part of the undoing here and part of the healing is in that relationship too. So like being witnessed in your sadness, in your grief, in your pain, in your joy, where somebody can sit with you and getting all the body language and all the energetic sense of like, and you are loved, and this is okay, and you are accepted, and you are safe. So that is putting some of those pieces back together again. So in the being witnessed is definitely part of the medicine. You know, there is regulation and dysregulation that happens in our nervous system. And the other thing is that when you have one nervous system that is a little bit vulnerable, and because your guard is down, then there is a process of co-regulation where one grounded nervous system kind of says to the other, like, you are safe here. And there's a lot of freedom, safety, and healing that happens without even any words, just in that process. So it's a very, it's a vulnerable place. It's a very safe medicine too. I'll just say that too, that, you know, working with psilocybin in particular, there are some contraindications with some antidepressant medications because they're working on the same receptor sites in the brain, but it's not lethal. It just, what would happen is it just blocks it. So you wouldn't have as deep of an experience. And then the other thing is that with psilocybin, which is the psychoactive ingredient in like magic mushrooms, it is not, there is no addictive qualities to it. So you can't get addicted. You also can't overdose on it. You could potentially have an uncomfortable experience, but you're still going to ride it out. You're still going to come back. I always tell people it's a round trip ticket. You're going to go in, you're going to come back out. Like, that's for sure. And then anything else in between, right, is the medicine, is the journey. And so I like to do my process of sitting with people is there is the combination of having that opportunity to go in. So, which means I provide, you know, like eye mask and headphones so that there's music. So, and what happens when you do that is when you're kind of decreasing the stimulation through your sense of sound and sight, all that energy then goes inward. So if you think about how people say, like, you know, your eyesight gets stronger if you can't hear very well, right? That sensory information that we're receiving just changes. And so through the sound and then the covering of the eyes, then all that kind of really deepens this internal awareness. And at the same time, being trauma informed, I always leave the invitation to whatever feels good for you. Because for some people, having their eyes covered does not feel safe. And we have to be really clear that the number one kind of the imperative, that's a good word. The number one imperative in this situation is safety. So safety is the primary treatment plan. And so recognizing that if people don't feel comfortable with the eye mask on, it's absolutely fine. Everything is an option. And then some people, like, everybody's journey is very, very different. And having sat for years now with this, I find that, you know, some people go inward and they say very little until the end, and it starts to come off and they start to come out and they really want to process, you know, what their experience was, what they saw. And then some people, you know, there's conversation throughout the entire journey and an opportunity to be seen and heard. And so at these really deeper one-on-one journey experiences, people really do, it's this about, you know, their own journey and their own experience, and they go deeper. There is also opportunity of doing a more mild dose in small group settings, which I wouldn't, the dose would be very different, but in those, the intention in those group settings is more for the being witnessed, being heard, being seen. And so there is a couple of different like implications for different doses, just depending on, you know, what is the experience that people are looking for. And then again, you know, it's important to emphasize that altered states of consciousness, you don't have to take psychedelics to get there. It is one of the routes to get there. People get to a psychedelic experience with breath work, with prayer, with meditation. And so there is access to it in other ways. I have found psychedelics to be a pretty surefire way. I mean, it's a pretty like intense process. I mean, and that most people do get there. But yeah, it's a journey into experiencing yourself in this space and time in a very different way that just like increases your awareness to you, into your life. Yeah. Every now and then I get aware of myself talking so much, and then I'm like, oh.
That's what you're here to do.
No, it's
That's
so
what you're
funny.
here to do.
And I'm just
I know,
like,
me
still,
too.
like, processing that. Like, oh.
I have a question. Amaya told me, but I can't remember, how long was this whole process?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I do a preparation beforehand. I usually meet with people one-on-one before any of the psilocybin happens, to really get an idea of like what is the intention and to start to build safety at that point. So I always let people know too, because safety is imperative, that if you meet with me one-on-one and it just doesn't feel like a good fit for you, like for some reason you couldn't feel comfortable, then I listen, I always really support people to listen to their intuition. So technically the experience, I would say, starts upon that first meeting where we sit and drop in with each other and really talk through what is the intention, what is present with you, what are you hoping to get out of this. But then on the day of the journey, it takes about 45 minutes for the medicine to come on, anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour, really. And then the journey lasts, it kind of peaks and there's about like 5 hours where the medicine is pretty strong. And then you start to come down out of it. I've had people continue to experience and feel the medicine in them for up to 8 to 10 hours. But it's the reason why I kind of start, in the late afternoon. And then by the time you're going to bed, people who sleep might have interesting dreams, but they can still then sleep. And then when you wake up, it's worn off. So yeah, anywhere from, I'd say on average 5 to 8 hours. Although it doesn't, like when I say 5 to 8 hours, that feels like a really long time, but it never feels like that. I think that because you're disconnected from your sense of time and space, it just goes by differently. Would you agree with that, or did it feel like long? Did it feel like 5 hours?
I always had a grip on reality, so like I kind of knew, but I was also so disinterested in keeping track of time in any way that, yeah, it's definitely a portal where you don't realize how long it is. Like the peak kind of feels much shorter than it really is when you're in the deep part of the medicine. But yeah, I think no matter, like if we had an intensive without psychedelics for that amount of time, I feel like that's still almost like a time warp. Like it's also the process that you're in feels like suspended from time, because you're dropping into a container, this intensive container where it's just you and another human being, and you're there to get to your most shadowy spots. So it's already, I feel like it doesn't feel that long, because it's like when you're having really good conversation with a girlfriend and you're like, wow, 2 hours has gone by, I need to get off the phone, kind of, but like magnify that experience, like the time passes quickly and feels kind of irrelevant for that, in that container.
Mhm.
There's shadows. How are you feeling about this?
I know.
Sorry about that.
I keep trying to find a
Yeah.
spot. There we go.
We can adjust if we need to, but
Was there any other questions? I love getting the questions. I feel like I could talk about this all day. So then I'm like, oh, what do people want to know?
What other, I have a question. If someone was on an antidepressant, what would be antidepressants that would, interact or like prevent the psilocybin from being as effective as possible?
So any SSRI, which are most antidepressants, they the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they all interfere with the psilocybin. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't have an experience. It would, some people would, like, with the inclusion of whoever is your prescriber is, like, titrate off, like not fully off, but even just down to be able to have an experience. And then, and then some people just use it to take into consideration the dose. And so you might have to take more to have a similar experience. So it really just depends on the amount that an SSRI is being taken.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, I thought it was interesting that you said this, the healing wounds from relationships, because I was feeling like, well, I'm so lucky because my parents were normal and I don't have any, like primal wounds and stuff like that. When you said relationships, I was like, wait a minute. I've had these horrible wounds from my relationships that I think, I've dealt with pretty well. But if I had, why would I think I don't really deserve to go to go deeper because my parents were normal? So I don't know. Or maybe that's just a different problem. But I'm really glad you said it, that it can be useful in healing wounds from relationships, because it's been 15 years since my divorce from my first husband, who I was with for 38 years. And I don't want to see him or have a relationship with him or anything like that. But there are still times when that betrayal, and everyday betrayal, lying every day, when that just kind of looms up, and I think, well, did I do something? You know, even though I know, and I've had tons of therapy. So yeah, I would love to go deeper. And I would also just love to go deeper for a psychedelic experience.
I
with
think
connecting with nature, since that's part of it.
absolutely. I mean, some people have like I have this intention and I want to work on, this trauma that I've been holding or this depression that I've really been in. But some people just want to expand their consciousness for the purposes of self-exploration. And I think that that's completely valid. And some people there's a growing amount of people who are work with psilocybin specifically to decrease anxiety surrounding death. And so there is a lot of, because of the connection you feel in the medicine, it's almost like it creates more curiosity and calm around making that transition. And so there is a growing field with this medicine in particular for the use of that. So it's not just, oh, I have this wound, right? But there's other purposes. The other thing that I would say too is I think some people come to psychedelics thinking like, oh, I want it to get rid of my suffering. And psychedelics won't get rid of anything, but what it does is it expands our capacity to hold that and then make room for other things. So instead of the suffering getting so much focus and attention, it expands our capacity, and our window of tolerance. It expands our capacity to kind of hold that suffering and then have a lot of room for joy and for other things, right? So being able to connect to beauty and wonder and awe, right? It changes the reference point in which how big this suffering is in our life.
So it's like expanding your emotional bandwidth in a sense, like, because that's what my kids always use that expression, their bandwidth. So
yeah, everything has to have a tech analogy these days. We're biohacking ourselves with these mushrooms.
yeah.
But I wanted to mention Judy, because you reminded me of one of the first circles before I had this virtual circle. I was hosting a circle in person in South Florida for a while, and I had a number of women really get stuck on how their trauma doesn't compare to other people's trauma. And I felt like they were really like, that is what they were suffering about, more so than the trauma itself, that they didn't feel allowed to feel traumatized because it didn't compare. Like, we know that there is tremendous suffering in the world. We know that if we were pressured to put experiences on a scale and a spectrum, that ours would fall somewhere in between, and somehow in this like framework, in this 3D world that we're living in, and this default mode network in our brain, we feel like that's so relevant. Like, we're not allowed to suffer, or we're not allowed to like qualify ourselves as somebody who has experienced trauma because of where we fall on the spectrum. But when you're in the medicine, there is no spectrum, because the entire universe is you, and you are the entire universe. And
I keep forgetting, Amalia, that, at least 20 years ago, probably more, maybe 25, I was in my spiritual guide therapist's office, talking about how, well, I'm okay. And she pulled down a book and read the definition of trauma.
right.
And it's like, she would have to tell me that over and over again. And I can't believe that I forgot it again.
Well, it's like so beautiful that you have this like root chakra sort of coherence. Like, you feel safe underneath it all because you were blessed with this childhood that made you feel safe. But there is formative experiences layered on top of that foundation that are incredibly impactful to the different layers of our evolution. And if your root chakra is in great shape, but your heart chakra is a bit, off kilter because of these experiences, just for a reference point, obviously, like, it is still like a beautiful reason to go inward and make sense of it. I think that idea that like the space that Julia is talking about, where you feel your suffering differently, that can be, there's a million ways to explain how it could be transmuted. Room for more joy, more perspective, more appreciation for what it taught you, all the things. For me, it actually did release the suffering. And the reason why is because I went in deciding that I wanted to rename discomfort and pain. Like, that was a big reason why I was going in. And I found how like my intellectual understanding of resisting pain is what makes the pain became a somatic experience. And I was able to feel the physical and psychological discomfort of being so off base, so unfamiliar in my body. And intentionally saying yes to that discomfort enough to where it became a different experience. It truly changed. The sensation in my body and brain shifted. And then I was able to take that away from the experience as in sober life, where I can notice like, oh, I don't like something and it's because of this. And as soon as I stop doing that, it's like, you can't have that without both parts. If I refuse to knock my head against the wall may still be there, but I've stopped knocking my head against it. So the pain is gone. and I really do think that a lot of what the outcome is, as far as what we suffer from, especially if it's on a loop, I feel lonely, I feel betrayed, I feel, difficulty trusting in the future, existential pain around, our mortality. All of this stuff is just it's just in our mind. All of it is a figment of the mind. And so we can decide a lot about how we want to configure that, especially going into an experience like this, deciding, that you want something different. Like for me, I got what I asked for. And I think having a clear intention and having such an intentional time to speak and drill down on our relationship, the process, and what I was really after, and creating space for that before I went in was a tremendous difference than taking medicine in a beautiful setting with nature by myself, because I didn't have an intention, because I didn't have a sitter, because I was just kind of like hoping for it to do the work. And I feel like a lot of that medicine worked because I had created this framework for it. Like I gave it a map. And I think that, what you mentioned, it's like, well, you know where your pain points are, and you know what the beliefs are that you're taking away from the pain point. Even if part of your brain knows it not to be true, you also know that you're running that program on some level because it keeps coming up, that feeling of betrayal or pain or whatever. And so I feel like if you were going in with the medicine, prior to the medicine, with intention, with understanding of working with that you may come out of it truly without that pain. I think it is possible. Not to say like it's a guarantee or anything, but I think it's possible because I experienced it.
I hope to maybe do this with you when I'm out in Pescadero Todos in the winter. But if someone wanted to do it, elsewhere, what is there a society or an organization or something that you
That's such a
people
good
are
question.
members of, and also how much in general would it cost?
Yeah, good questions. I think right now it really depends on where you live about the legalities of it. And so finding people, I mean, like I think if you start asking around, do you know anyone? Do you know anyone? Do you know anyone? Names start to pop up. I would just always suggest like make sure you're asking who, like if you were to sit with somebody, make sure you talk to somebody who've sat with them before, how long they've been doing it, what's their training look like, and then sit with them, really meet with them before doing the medicine, and your body doesn't lie. So really get like how comfortable you feel with that person. But I mean, like I have a network that I'm connected to that's all across the United States. And so like if you were to reach out to me through Amalia, I could, probably find some names.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to Denver tomorrow.
Oh yeah.
Colorado. And my youngest daughter, no, my middle daughter is very pregnant, about a week past her due date. And anyway, so I know people in her life have access to this kind of stuff. And she's given me some, because I had a friend that was actually very ill and dying and depressed, and we thought it might be good for him, although none of us were trained. I was a school psychologist, but I'm certainly not a trained therapist. But anyway, he died before we actually did it. So I have these capsules and I don't know what's in them or what kind of dose it is.
You should find
Um,
out.
But I'm going to be in Colorado a lot in the next few months for extended periods of time. And I would like to do this kind of therapy.
Yeah, and in Denver, I think it's pretty easy to find right now. I mean, you can just look online in
But
Denver.
so but I mean, would there be, therapists that are licensed or whatever, or would you think even just people that you feel comfortable with would be okay to work with, or you think it really should be a therapist?
I think for when you're, especially if you're not familiar with altered states of consciousness, I really highly suggest going into it with somebody who's trained specifically with psychedelic medicine. One, because they, there is an experiential component that you go into to be trained with the medicine, but then also, there's just a lot of things that can come up in that space, and you want to know that the person that you are sitting with is skilled to respond to whatever comes up. And so whether that for you, I don't think it necessarily has to be a licensed therapist. I mean, that's the framework that I was trained from, because that's where I came from. But I really think if it's not, even if it is a licensed therapist, I think the same rules apply. Sit with them, make sure you feel comfortable with them.
Right.
How
Right.
long this experience, and ask if you can speak to someone who they've sat with, but there are a lot of, I think even there's like agencies and stuff that you can train through in Denver now because it's legal. So there'll be therapists, and I think that the model that they're working under is the model through MAPS, which is that there's 2 people in the room. So usually one of them is licensed and then one of them is trained, but not necessarily a licensed clinician.
Okay.
So yeah, Denver, it's gonna be pretty easy to find options.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll actually be kind of outside of Denver, but I'll be close enough. So,
All through Colorado,
Yeah,
though,
all through Colorado.
yeah.
because it's legalized in the state. And I actually know a lot of people there. So if you want me to ask around, I can ask the people I know there if they have any resources. And
Okay.
Tia said that she knew where to get the medicine, but not the support, right? Isn't that what you said, Tia? Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have any response to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of like finding support, I always think like, I always think like, go start asking around to like at your local yoga studio or naturopath, or right, like
Your women's circle, your
your-
midwife, your doula, your
yeah, where do the hippies hang out?
Yeah.
And you probably find a psychonaut or 2 that would have experience and be able to guide you. Tia, where are you?
I'm in Florida. I actually have a kind of unique question. So I have an incredibly sensitive body. I don't even do well with like weed, honestly. Just mentally, I don't do well with weed. So I wonder if you've had anyone come through that had a similar like system to me that found it beneficial. I have friends who have like kind of the keys to the other doors, like the other ways to kind of access that state of mind without psychedelics. And like I said, like I know where to get it if I want to pretty easily.
Yeah.
But I've been wondering a lot if that would be potentially helpful, but I also don't want to make anything worse. So I don't know if you've had anyone come through that had a bad experience where afterwards they didn't do well.
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. I mean, a couple of thoughts that come up for me, and one is that like I really believe in the diversity of each human, and so different medicines for different people. If somebody has never had any psychedelics, because I often get that, like people are like, they come to me because I'm a therapist and they're like, I want to try this, but I want to do it in a supervised way.
Right.
And what I sometimes encourage is for people to build a relationship with a plant before we do a full dose, which would be like trying a microdose and seeing how that sits in your body. Because a microdose should be, a true microdose is subperceptual, meaning you wouldn't perceive it. It might just feel like a little bit of a heart opening, a little bit of a lift, a little, right? Like a lot of people are replacing their antidepressants with microdosing. And so if you think about that's the kind of response, but you can still drive, you should still be able to do those things. But what I would suggest would be like, build a relationship with how it feels and responds in your body. You might try a microdose, you might try double the microdose and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then to
I
use that as
think-
a reference.
I think a microdose would be like a normal person taking a regular dose for me, just based off of like, I mean, when I had my wisdom tooth pulled, they told me that the laughing gas would be like having a couple glasses of wine, and it was like I was on like another planet. So
I told her the same thing before we met. I was like, drugs don't affect me the same way as other people. When I had a medical procedure and they gave me laughing gas, it was supposed to like make me like drift off, and instead I wanted to fly off the table. My whole body was like, emergency, you're totally like you're totally effed up. And my body responded to trying to be pushed out of its normal realm and off its space by trying to hold on tighter. And so I really resonate with what you're saying. And I would say that the reason why we are so sensitive is because on many levels, we are that afraid of being pushed off of our base. Like it is our body keeping us safe. Do not let that other, don't let that unfamiliar feeling come in. And that's obviously just anecdotal, but I feel like I understand what you're talking about because in many ways I share it. And it was comforting to me that even if it is uncomfortable or different than the next person, it's not physically going to hurt me. So it's just a matter of how my body experiences it. And it doesn't really matter how it compares to someone else's body's experience of it. Because I felt safe in taking it. I felt safe that the medicine wasn't going to hurt me and that I was in a safe container. And that I was, like she said, a round trip ticket. But I also knew that like the beginning of my journey, when the feeling started to come on, I was super uncomfortable. And I was telling Julie, like, I wonder why my body is calling this discomfort. My body is perceiving this as something negative when other people might be like, hell yeah, like who the party's getting started. But instead, like for me, it felt like unsafe and unsure. And but I was there for it. Like I knew that was coming, and I was practicing saying yes to it and welcoming the medicine in and allowing myself to be uncomfortable. So just anecdotally, I understand where you're coming from, and that was my experience.
Yeah. I would also say the thing that you're speaking to without using the word necessarily is like a really important component to this experience is your ability to surrender to it. And so while I could create a very safe container, it is also required that the person that I'm inviting into the container is also able to surrender to their experience. So usually the discomfort that people feel is when they're in the resistance to the experience, right? And so if it doesn't, and there's a lot of theory around like I said, like it's about taking enough, but there's a lot of people who are like, I mean, they've taken like 3 or 4 times the amount that you need just to see, like, it's not one of those substances where, you like, because you can't overdose, you're not going to get sent to somewhere you're never coming back from. But I hear what you're saying. It's like, oh, you might not need to take as much and to have a similar experience as somebody. But what is going to be more important is that whoever you're with and wherever you're with, you're able to surrender to knowing like this might be uncomfortable, this might be intense, and I'm okay.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big part of it is like you're supposed to be like really unfamiliar and in another universe, like you said. And And it takes a lot for other people sometimes because they're so committed to the matrix. Like they're so committed to the default mode network. They're so committed to
Right.
the framework of reality that it takes quite a bit to push you past. And
Mhm.
then there are some people who are really like, they're dancing in the other realms more.
That's
And
me.
right. So if you need less to push you to that place, like you've also birthed unmedicated, right? Because was that, yeah. So that's like a comparable scenario in many ways. Like,
Mhm.
it might be uncomfortable. You also know it might be otherworldly. Your experience could
It
never
was
compare to anyone else's.
very
It's
otherworldly.
right. So it's like a similar comparison, even if it's not similar in all its sensations, as far as the unknowability and the individual experience of it. It's like I feel like birth, an unmedicated birth in particular, but all birth is pretty psychedelic as well.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, but I also will say, like, I've had people sit with me who are like, I can't do weed. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I totally get that. Weed is a very different substance.
Yeah, of course.
And so again, I always encourage people to listen to the wisdom of their own body about what feels right for you to be ingesting, what feels comfortable, because there really is different experiences for different people. And some people, marijuana is not their medicine, and for others people, I've had them, really enjoy it. So
Yeah, that's not, yeah. It makes me very lonely and very depressed. It like aggravates any sort of depression I might have. So
yeah,
worse, actually. Like I'll be like really cool, I'll be doing great, and I'll be like, oh, I'm having like fun, so I'll try some. And then I'm like miserable the next like week. And it's like borderline suicidal.
Different for
Like
everybody.
when I do it, so it's intense. So
yeah.
I try to be cautious with introducing anything into my system because of that.
Yeah. Have you ever tried a microdose before?
No, I've never tried anything more than weed before because of like my experiences with it. And it's like I have like most of my friends are like some form of like recovering addict. So like I've been able to vicariously experience things through their like stories that they've told. So
Like I'm good on that.
Yeah.
I have very crippling social anxiety, and I'm wondering if this is something that might help me work out of that a little bit. So I've been thinking about it more lately.
Yeah, it would be an interesting thing for you to think about. I would encourage you to chat with somebody. That the thing about anxiety is any anxiety, it lives in an activated nervous system response, right?
Mhm.
And so your body really truly is seeking safety. And
Yeah.
a lot of times anxiety is that like, your like the stress response system is kind of like stuck on. It hasn't been completed yet.
Yeah.
And finding that safety for you to complete that experience and surrender in that space of being uncomfortable and being okay. Yeah.
I'll look into it a little bit more.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
How much, can I ask a question? I just wondered, like, I don't have any idea of like what a microdose is in amounts.
A microdose would be like 75 milligrams. I don't know if that makes sense for you anyway.
It's
Like,
just it's curious.
or
Okay.
0.25 or 0.025, 0.25 of a gram. So like, just to give a kind of a reference, like psychedelic doses are anywhere from like 3 grams and up. And then a microdose is around 0.025, 0.25, depending on your system.
I've done it and I feel like it's not perceptible. Like I know, I'm sorry. We're just going to live with the
No,
sun.
you're
We're
okay.
sun goddesses.
I love sun.
The microdose does not feel you do not feel like you're under the influence. Like now it's becoming trendy and like tech companies to like have their employees microdose at work to become more creative.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
to problem solve or whatever. Like your faculties are with you, but the whole concept of the default mode network in the brain being super predictive, meaning like we fill in the blanks before we ever really have all the information, because that's what gets us through life. It also gets us into a lot of assumptions and kind of like feeling boxed in by the reality we've constructed.
Right.
I've been curious about microdosing on a more regular basis, which I haven't done, but know a lot of people who have gotten through a lot of the rigidity that comes from life. Like, okay, I have a kid, a couple kids and a job and ailing parents, and I have so much stuff that my world is closing in on me. And I think like that's a really just common stage of life to be in. I happen to be at the age where many of my peers are in that stage of life. It's very like just a lot of stuff all at once. And of course, everyone has that version of experience throughout life at all ages. But I think it's very easy to become contracted when you have a huge sense of responsibility. And the microdosing that I did try helped soften those edges of possibility of what am I trying to say, that soften the sense of obligation, to be able to expand outside of like what I like, where time feels incredibly finite and energy feels incredibly finite, and I feel kind of like I couldn't get out of the hamster wheel. All it did was just like that story just stopped a little bit, like and I was just able to be a little bit more creative or expansive about what I thought my possibilities were or reality was.
It can really help interrupt ruminating thoughts.
I was just wondering about that and just being more in the moment, kind of.
Very so, yeah.
Describe it's like really helping you be more in your heart, right? You can like really see the joy in things because you are so much more in the present moment. There's something that happens around the like neurosomatic mindfulness, right? So neuro meaning your thoughts and your brain, and soma meaning your mind, your body. So when the two of them synchronize, right, and you're thinking about the same thing that your body is doing, right, that is what brings you to the present moment. And while we can again get to that point through a lot of different ways, a microdose is a great way to get there, right? It's kind of releasing those running narratives, releasing those intrusive thoughts, and getting to the present moment where you can find joy.
I like the way you both refer to this as medicine. And I think that is an important distinction.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is this, in fact, it's been medicine that's been with us for quite a long time. And not to side track too much, but for me recently, I've gotten really into like looking at goddess history, where women were the healers, like for so much of the time, all the way up in, until it was like very brutally torn from us during the burning times. And like, so there's a lot of history around like the use of, there's like even mushrooms in hieroglyphics in Egypt. So there's a long history of the use of these medicines before any of the medicines that we know to be medicine, right? And so much of that is, just things that have been extracted from nature. So I really feel connected to this renaissance that's happening for like nature's medicine.
Right. And women and community being healers, not having to go to monoliths to access healing, but being able to feel cared for in community and to be able to trust the wisdom of sisters and people who have been educated in a decentralized way, because a lot of what she knows and does is wisdom from ceremonial wisdom. It's not, my experience was not clinical, even though she is a therapist. Like it was very, I've been to like, my ayahuasca ceremony was with a medicine man, like a shaman who I had been doing sweat lodge with for years, who, knew all the medicine songs and utilized all the directions and the animals and the tobacco, and it was beautiful and it was ceremonial, and it was much more, my experience with her had a much more similar energy to that experience than anything that I've experienced in a clinical setting or in a psychotherapy setting. So
Mhm.
the term could be misleading, because I think if it's going to be effective, that there has to be a tether to this kind of ancient ceremonial wisdom. Because it is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard the stoned ape theory. Has anyone heard of this? Have you heard of it? Stoned ape theory. So if this is one of the theories of how human beings became human beings, like apes found
It was,
and
yeah,
they ate the mushrooms and they expanded their consciousness in such at such a high velocity that they started behaving and interacting with the world differently. And it's one of the theories as to how we may have evolved, if you believe we evolved from apes, like, to each his own. But I think it's actually a theory with teeth that, like, a lot of people who wonder and study like how we came to be as human beings, that's in the running, because the medicine obviously has been around for longer than we could ever know. It's from the earth, like, and it was, if it's created for us, like, we have certain receptors in our body that are designed to interact with this medicine. Like, otherwise it wouldn't work. It would kill us, or it wouldn't have any effect.
right.
It has this effect. And I don't think that's a mistake. Like,
Yeah,
it's too, whoa, it's too big of a deal for it to feel like a mistake to me.
Can I just, you said stoned ape, like
Stoned
AP?
Yeah, APE,
Okay,
like an ape that ate a bunch.
gotcha. Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. All right.
but I love that too. It is also like a reframe and a like I don't know, like returning the word, using the word medicine for these plants, right? Like, it is a reckoning. It is a returning the original wisdom back to plant kingdom, where I
Yeah.
think
Right.
so. Absolutely.
Especially because we grew up believing that you could take this medicine and you could never return, that you could be psychotic for the rest of your life and be, like, all of the propaganda around psychedelics were so intense and so misleading, and buried all the incredibly helpful research that had been done
Right.
prior to this whole culture war on psychedelics. I think it takes time. It's, again, this is another, like, birth analogy for me, but, like, like, we've been told a certain thing about birth, so we believe something about birth, and it takes a long time to see what else it could be besides the thing that we're told by the medical or the media. Like, we have to hear it. We have to hear people's personal stories. We need story medicine. That's another thing that's really powerful, and that's why we have this circle, is that just hearing people's stories and experiences, and partaking in people's individual wisdom, is a huge way of deprogramming the fearful propaganda that we all suffer from on so many of these really important topics. And yeah, it'd only be medicine if you're not fearful of it, right? So it's like, we have to climb over the fear and the story that we were handed before it could ever be effective in the way that it was designed to be. So hence this conversation.
Yeah. I agree. I've had many conversations. The therapist I'm seeing now is also a doula, which I think is just such a fabulous combination of skills and philosophies. So,
Did you say they're
yeah.
a doula?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I actually oftentimes make that comparison actually with psychedelic work, is that it is more like doula work. It is, because doulas, right, they're there to usher your experience, but, like, you're the star of the show, right? And they're just there in that supportive role. And so psychedelic doula work is another,
Awesome. Yeah.
work, because I do think it does a good job of more depicting what that role is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
In the moment, you're not creating anything except for safety. Like
Mhm.
you're allowing that process and that body to be in its own wisdom, and even creating the safety up until then. It's very similar. I've had a doula, and I've had this experience with Julie, and I would say that they're very comparable. And it's when the person that tries to be a hero that you get into the most trouble,
Mhm.
because really they're meant to be quite in the background until they're expressly asked to be, like, to be more than that, to be more than just a sense of safety. I feel like that there's a wisdom in that is far greater than anything that they could do. Like I could tell that you were experienced and felt safe and secure, and therefore I could, without you, saying anything. It's very palpable, and especially when you're on, you have the medicine in your body, that is so perceptible. Everything is, like Judy already knows this, but like I had to take my pants off 10 minutes into it because all of a sudden these buttery, comfortable leggings that I can breathe in and wear all day long and practically sleep in felt like a straight jacket for my stomach. And I just like I must take my pants off. Hey now. And it was just indicative of how more heightened not only your physical senses, but your sixth sense,
All your senses,
your, and the person's energy and their, that co-regulation is on a different level. When you have that running through your system, you can really feel that person's true sense of like that they feel safe for you, that they're not worried about it for you. Yeah. And that's so important when you're embarking upon something that feels so new.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like having that anchor that says like, we're safe here. You can dig in, you can take off the pants, you know, take my pants, it's fine.
Yeah.
Take off all the parts,
right?
Take off your armor, really, and like really reveal what's underneath the armor is what is happening, and so that you can really see yourself. And the amount of downloads and information, I mean, I like the stuff that you were saying, I also felt like was meant for me to hear. And so I think that the mycelium network, so when mushrooms are grown, the mycelium runs the roots. They run for miles underground, connecting all living things.
Right.
So the mycelium network can send energy and,
nutrition and electrical signals, and it's like a communication network. Yeah.
And then you realize like, oh, and then we're a part of that. We're in that mycelium network. And so I think that oftentimes that's one of the joys for me, is I feel like, again, just in similar to this intention of this women's circle of hearing from each other. When I was sitting with her and witnessing, her wisdom and her tap into that, like I got to benefit from that as well.
That is
right.
For sure.
That's cool. Like in that documentary, Fantastic Fungi, it really goes into that whole, I've seen that a few times, but that kind of explains, it's interesting.
Yeah. There's another documentary out based on Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And that one's pretty good too. They do in that one show more of the very clinical framework, meaning that it's like in an office, you're on a couch, hang off in that space, but it's also, I think, a reflection of the embedded kind of like, I don't know, sterilization of what the healing process is supposed to look like.
Right.
So that's the other reason why I really like to work outdoors or in like a very comfortable setting and space, and those things are all part of the medicine as well. Okay. But there's still really good information in that documentary about all the different psychedelics and their purposes and the history and the science behind a lot of it as well.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and his is a lot about the research, which is probably more why there was a lot of clinical environments because they're doing, not just journeys for therapeutic reasons, but also for research. And really large organizations are funding the research. And I think that was it? Do you remember the organization that did the study on the fear of death and the psychedelic use for that? That was in Michael Pollan's book. And
Okay.
anyway, so that might be why it feels a little bit more clinical.
Yeah, they're
because
trying to control for more variables for the research.
Right.
right, which would not work for me. But also I feel like some people feel like if I am going to embark upon something like this, the only place I would feel safe and the only person I would feel safe with is a medical professional, because we have been made to believe that that is, the only way to be safe. And so it really matters like where you're coming from. Like for me, that would be the opposite effect. I would feel very unsafe and uncomfortable. So that would not be good for
Yeah.
me. Other people might feel like that would be the safest place, because at home or whatever would feel out of control. And somehow a medical environment would make them feel more held and secure. So
Mhm. Right.
it matters, like that matters regardless, like it's not a right or wrong, but it matters how you feel about it,
Right. Right.
I feel like I've
That's
bridge for that. It's like, oh, there is some framework and understanding of this like Western idea of mental health, whatever that means. And I do find that a lot of people find comfort in me having that background, even though I think that when I'm actually sitting with people, it's much more of an intuitive process than necessarily based on a theoretical framework that I've been trained in.
right. Right. It's interesting. Hmm.
You guys have any more questions you want to ask Julie?
I think it's safe to say we're both looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna be like in kind of I don't know where in Colorado you know people. My daughter lives near Nederland, which is kind of near Boulder, so out of the city, but
Middle north of the city. That's still, I mean,
like northwest, yeah. But I mean, I know I can find the stuff, but I don't know. And I do know one friend of hers, as a woman that she's very close to that has done a lot of I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the
Alaska.
ayahuasca ceremonies, and that's where I think my daughter got me these micro doses, which I have sitting in my closet.
Also,
But
you can ask her doula.
ask my doula, ask her doula, ask
Ask-
her doula.
Well, ask your doula for Charlotte, but her
But
doula.
no, yeah, I might meet her doula. She just texted me that she's still pregnant.
Well, I think it
But-
matters. I mean, getting the medicine is like the last part of the concern. I feel like you want to find a person even when I did ceremony, I've had so many opportunities to do ceremony and even a desire to do ceremony, a calling to do it. But I've stopped at, well, I don't have a relationship with anybody.
Right.
And for me, like, I don't want to do ceremony with somebody I don't have a relationship with. That doesn't mean I have to be best friends with them, but I want to at least be in a non-psychedelic ceremony, a cacao ceremony, a sweat lodge, a prayer of some kind. I want to have a sense of this person's energy. Like for me, I will know instantly. I don't know if everyone else feels that way, but I really only need to interact with somebody for like 5 minutes to know if it's a yes or a no.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I need that first. I'm not going to just, make an appointment for psychedelic, therapy
Right.
or with somebody I've never, spoken with. And so like finding the person, whether they're a ceremonial person, a shaman, somebody who's been taught through a lineage, or somebody who's taught through, mainstream medical paradigm. I mean, now that's an option, where it didn't used to be, but I think that really it's alchemy of you and that person. And if you have to find the person, as soon as you have the conversation, I feel like you'll know the medicine. Finding the actual medicine is the kind of the last.
Right.
process.
Okay. Cool. All right.
I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, I'm hoping, yeah, it's
we
all
really
just,
want to hear about your experiences.
yeah.
And of course, Sharon, you can always come down here with Judy and have
Mhm.
yourself a little retreat and have a day dedicated to being with Julie. And so that's an option.
Okay, that sounds wonderful too.
Baja is always an option.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Oh,
Psychedelic without even any mushrooms.
Yeah.
Right?
Baja.
Yeah, Baja.
right. Okay.
You're muted if you're talking, Judy. Are you talking?
Yeah, I also want to say, Sharon, this is Amalia. Amalia, this is Sharon, two very important people in my life.
I already know you.
Right, I feel the same. Yes, I feel the same. This is kind of unrelated, but I was a teacher for many years before I went back to school, and when you're teaching, like the more senses you can involve, the more that likely the child is going to get that. So just several things you said just remind, like, just kind of like basic education things, like, and if a child does not feel safe, because I've taught, at one point taught some really high poverty schools, if a child isn't safe, they're not going to be able to learn, just because psychologically they're worried every second of, where am I going to sleep tonight, or whatever, or who's beating who. And so it's just kind of interesting about the senses being engaged, because you described that early on when you do this, that all of your senses are engaged, and just really opens up your mind, because I think that definitely, I can see that with kids in learning. So it makes sense on this kind of topic. So anyway, it was fascinating. I'm so glad.
I'm glad you were here for it.
Yeah, so anyway,
Well, thank you all. And also,
thank
like,
you.
I think you can always find me through Amalia. And if you ever have any questions or want some referrals or just some guidance, please feel free to
Okay.
reach out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, women.
All right.
It was a very intimate group today, but really cool because we actually got to talk it out more. So
Yeah, it was really great. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Judy, for letting me know.
Love you guys.
All right, love you too.
Bye.
Bye.